Hi, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I want to show you how you can create a powerful text validation in UIKit with Combine. We're going to turn the nonsense view model that is in most validation with Combine tutorials and turn it to something amazing. So to show you why the approach most tutorials take on this subject is a bad approach, I think we should actually program out their solution. Then I explain to you the limitations I met with their solution when I tried to program that out in the Messenger clone application. And then we're going to turn that bad solution into something amazing. But before we start, we're going to use the custom text field from the previous video to perform a validation. So if you didn't watch that one, it's just a custom class for a text field that can create different instances of itself. So name, email, password. So I'm going to use the repository from the last video as a starting point for this one, and I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. So now let's jump to Xcode and start coding. Okay, cool. Now let's get back to the view model I promised to create. So let's say that we wanted to validate that the user typed in a valid name in our custom text field. Then we will, of course, have a name. Not have that. We will have a name view model. Cool. And now start by importing Combine, since we're going to use that module, and call a final class here, of course, of name view model. And now, since we have a name view model, let's pretend that this screen serves as a screen for a name validation. So I think it will be suitable for us to name this now, instead of test view controller, to have it as a name view controller. Okay, jump back to the name view model, and now start by declaring a state called name state. And this one will serve as the validation state of our text field. So let's go with the first case. It's going to be idle. The second one is going to be error. And the last one is, of course, going to be success. Okay, now create two at publish properties. First one is going to be first name. We set it to an empty string. And the second one is going to be state, validation state of our text field, and set it to the enum we just created and have it as idle. Now, the purpose of these two at publish properties is that we're going to use our text field that we have, and we're going to create, by using that text field, we're going to create a text publisher. So everything we type in that text field is going to be published, and we want that publisher to be bind to this publisher here. So every change in a text field will now also affect this property. Then we're going to observe this property here in the view model, and in every change in this property, we're going to apply certain filters based on the current string. So we will check whether, like, does it have numbers? Does it have special characters? Is it empty, or is it too short? Then we will combine all of those filters into a single state, and we're going to assign that state then to this state. And then in our name view controller, we're going to subscribe to this state, and we will get the updates, the recent updates on our text field, and then we can do our changes based on those updates. So if you don't understand what the publisher is and what the subscription or subscriber is, I can show you a simple example. So you can think of my website and this channel as two publishers. Both of them are going to publish iOS content. One is publishing articles and one is publishing videos. You don't know when, but they're going to. So if you wanted to respond to the changes in my video, so when a video is posted, you don't want to check, is it posted to today, it's going to be posted tomorrow, and so on. No, you want to, so to get updates on my video, you want to, of course, subscribe to the channel. So you can make changes based on the videos. You can leave a like or a comment and respond to the videos. So, and you do the same in Combine. we have, like I said, my channel as a publisher. And if you want to subscribe to the updates of this publisher, you have to create a subscription. Okay, that's in really simple terms in how it works. So I think with the name state here, just having the error by itself without the feedback is pretty foolish. So let's create a child enum that we are going to declare inside of here and call it error state. You have a case, let's see the errors we have. It's empty. We have a case too short. We have a case with numbers, and we have a case with special chars. It's simpler, and we're going to use all those errors to create a description for the error label we're going to use later. So you of course need a string value. This is going to be computer property, and we're going to switch on all the errors. So switch on self, a command B, so you get this error, and just press on fix. It makes your life simpler. And now go and return a string that makes sense. So you can say field can't be empty. Go with return name can't be a single character. Yeah. Character. Or name is too short. Yeah, that would make more sense. Name is too short. Or return name. Name can't contain any numbers, of course, and return name can't contain, whoops, special characters. All right. Okay, cool. Now we have all those fixed. Let's get back to the filters that I was talking about. So create the different filters that we need. So what we need to do is that we need to translate the text input that we have into a new state for validation. So we have to create new publishers, and those publishers are going to be affected by the text that we are writing in. So these two also have to be publishers. And what are this computer property going to observe? It's going to observe the publisher value of the first name. So if you have a $sign in front of it, you get the publisher from this add published property. Now you map and check whether the current string is empty. And you think maybe that should be it. But you look at the type now, it publishers, map, publish string, publish bool. And if you attach another operator, it will get even worse. So how can we handle this? You have to add this method, and this will erase. It will act as a type eraser, but I think it actually just hides it. And when it does that, it also captures what's actually important to us, which is the bool value in this case, and it will return it in an any publisher, wrapped in an any publisher instead, which is exactly what we want, because now you see that it compiles. And we can get back to the next one is to short. Going to be the same thing, any publisher, bool, never, and we do the same thing here. Let's go a bit down below. First name, we do the same dance again. Now let's go with the parentheses, go with $0, and go with the count. Say it's going to be bigger than or equal to 2. That doesn't make sense. So what do? We do the opposite of that, which means it has to be bigger than 1 character and erase to any publisher. Okay. Let's go with has numbers of any publisher. And yeah, we go with bool, of course. These are going to be filters, so we have to use a conditional. and go map, and you do this method as numbers, which aren't going to make any sense now, but it will soon. Erase in publisher, boring to type it out. So let's copy this, do the same thing, and you just change this one to has special chars. Okay, cool. And you go with the same here. Let's go with has special chars again. Okay, now Xcode will complain because these two methods doesn't exist. The string value doesn't have them. So let's do the same thing that we did last time. We have to extend the functionality of the string type. So let's go string plus extensions. Really cool. We only need the foundation. So let's go. And this one, let's see. In iOS 16, you actually have a much simpler way to create specific conditional for what you need. So what do I mean by that? I'm talking about regular expression. So in iOS 16, you have a regular expression. I think it's a struct. I don't quite remember, but you have a regular expression that you can use. But since I created the Messenger clone application supporting iOS 14 and up, I've done it a little bit old school way, but I think it's still useful to know. So let me show you how to do this. And it isn't too hard. So let's just follow along. String fulfills regular expression. And what are we going to pass in? It's going to be, of course, a regular expression. And what it's going to return, we are going to use that regular expression and return a Boolean. Okay. So how do you do this? First, you create this test and you say ns predicate. And this isn't too hard. It looks tricky at first because this is not a normal string. This is actually the syntax you're passing in. So you have to write self for self actually, and you have to check whether it matches this placeholder. So you do percentage and at, then you have, this is the placeholder for this argument here. And then what is the type we have here now? I think if we go hard text test.evaluate, yes, there we go. Then we will get, now we can evaluate it because it doesn't know about the self. We haven't used the self here yet, but now since we're on a string, we have access to the self. So we evaluate self and check whether it matches the regular expression that we are going to pass in. And then, of course, we have created a conditional. So if it fails, it should return false. And otherwise, if it passes the conditional, it should return true. Okay. So now we have to create a different regular expression that we can match with our string and check whether it's true or false. So the first one, and this of course can't be private because we need it outside of this file, go with returning a Boolean, and you call it has numbers, which is what we had in our filter, and we use our helper function and we pass in a regular expression. Now, this seems a little bit hard at first, but it's actually pretty simple. Go with a dot. This means any character at all. And this means any number of repetitions. So this is basically any string. Then you go with the square brackets and you look for a number, of course, because that's what we want to find. But if you stop there, you actually you will get, even though a string value contain a number, you will actually get a failure now because it will actually stop at the number it finds. It won't match the rest of the string, so it will actually fail. And if that didn't make sense, I can show you why. So let's go to here and let me show you this website. It's pretty good. It gives you an explanation of what any of these characters does. So here I have a string, and this is not 5 different strings, it's one string. And now you see we have matched the number that we're looking for. But as you can see here, when we got to the end of that number, it stops. It doesn't match the rest of the string. So what do we need? We need the same we had in front of the square brackets, which means any character, any number of times, and then we match the rest of the string. Okay, I hope that made sense. Let's go back. And now the next one will make a lot more sense now, because this one is going to be, it looks tricky at first, but since we went through the hash numbers, this one will make a lot more sense. So what you do is you go with string fulfills regular expression again, and you do the same thing like we did above with the first one, but now this one, the difference here is that we're going to go with all the letters in uppercase, all the letters in lowercase, and all the numbers. And then you go with the same again. But the trick here is you go with this sign. And what this essentially means is that now this means not. So what if you take away numbers and letters, what are you left with? You're left with special characters. So then you go and match special characters. So we did the same like we did with the dot and the asterisk. And now we have special characters we are matching for. And you, of course, match the rest of the string here. Okay, cool. Now this will make sense. No, we didn't use special character, but let's do it. So let's go back to the name view model. There you go. And you have to just paste this in, Command B. It should compile. Really cool. And now let's create a function that actually sets off the validation. So let's go here. Start validation. And now the idle case makes sense because now we can use it to check whether the state itself is it idle, else return, so we don't set off the validation state multiple times. That doesn't make any sense. So let's move down below and you access this publisher, which is called combine latest. So, oops, which means that you can combine multiple publishers into a single state. So, or you observe multiple publishers and you can get the most recent state from all of them concurrently. I think it's concurrently, but they will at the same time deliver the most recent state that they're in at, which is what we want. We want to know, with all these filters combined, what is the most recent state of our text field. Okay. Now go back, and the first one is empty. The second is too short. Third one was hash numbers, and the last one was hash special characters. We can map this one, and it will return to us a tuple. So we can use that tuple to create an error hierarchy. So we go with if $.0, then you go with return error. So now the error, the .empty error will hide the highest precedence. And I can show you what I mean with that later. It will make more sense once we have the errors. 2 and 3, and you go with is too short. Has numbers, of course, and last one has special chars. Okay, if it passes all those errors, it gets past them, and none of them are true, then we of course have a success case. Now, since we actually have, like I said, used all our filters and combined them into a single state, we can assign them to not just the state, but to the publisher of the state, right? Because here we're using a publisher still. It's not just a normal value, it's actually a publisher. And the reason we need, because we want to assign it to this publisher, because we want to subscribe to a publisher later. Okay, really nice. And this one will fail, is too short. Shouldn't that work? Is too short. Yeah, but Oh no, that's not the error, of course. The error case is just too short. Okay, nice. Go back here and you add the too short. And now this one is a simple fix because the enum doesn't know how to compare our cases. And you just need to add this protocol, yeah, called equitable. Let's us compare these cases. And it should work. And I missed that one too. Really amazing. Go back here and just type numbers, Command B, and it should. Oh, I missed that one too. That was horrible. Now should compile. Okay, really cool. So I just want to take a single second here and appreciate what we're actually doing, because we are not telling that, you see with the filters, we're not telling our function to do step 1, go to step 2, do step 3, maybe let's do some filter and so on. No, it just does it. And it is in its true nature is actually declarative programming. Instead of telling our code to go to the exact steps uh, of what to do, we are instead telling our code what we desire it to do. We desire it to be, but desire it to do. That's one of the reasons why I love combine. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on. What we need now is we need to create a text publisher so we can bind it to that first name property in our view model. So let's go back to the name view controller. And now we need to create an extension because the UI text field doesn't have it by itself. So we have to, of course, then extend functionality of a UI text field. You jump back to the file and you jump down below, and since it's a UI text field, we need, there's the UI kit library. This is a text publisher. We need, of course, the combine library. So let's go and extend. Whoops, I missed the naming. Guess some of you saw that. It's extensions. Nice. Got that? Okay, cool. Then you move and you go with UI text field, you extend that class. And now let's create the method that we need. So it's going to be called func text publisher. And what it's going to return, of course, it's going to return any publisher with string value. And it can't fail, so have never. And how are you going to access a publisher from the text field? So what you can do is you can create a publisher based on the notification that we observe. So then we have to use the notification center. You call the default. And then for which notification are we going to observe? We're going to observe the UI text field text did change notification. And for which object? It's this object that we're passing from, which is self. Now you do a compact map so we get rid of the nil. You don't need to do that. This will look better. Do a parentheses because we have to do casting. It doesn't know about that we are using a UI text field yet, so the object will be any. So we have to cast it as a UI text field. And now, since we have access to the UI text field, we can access this text property. And you have to do the same dance that we have done multiple times now. So erase to new publisher, Command B, and it should compile. And if you didn't get this, is essentially what we're doing, observing this method. And we know that when the text has changed, we can access the text. This is the same as you will access the text property of in the custom text field. We're doing the same. We're accessing the text property there too. And this is the same thing. So we know that text has changed. We get the current text field we're working on, and we access the text property. Nice. And we have created a publisher with it. Okay. So let's move back to the name view controller. Is that right? Did I miss anything? Okay. Let's go here. And what we need now we need, of course, the combine framework. Now let's do some cleanup here before we implement the name view model. So because this is starting to look a little bit messy, go with components above here, and you go one below, and here you say life cycle. Okay, and we can move all this nonsense that we have here into a setup code. This one should be a private setup. Cool. Call it in here, and you go a mark, and you call setup. And now what you see, we miss the properties. So we are also going to have a mark here called properties. And now what is our properties? The first one is going to be the name view model. You can actually just go with here, x2. And then when we are subscribing, we need to store the subscription somewhere. So just call this subscriptions, and it's going to be equal to set. And it's going to be a what set? It's going to be a set of any cancellables, and initialize it. Nice. And now, what are we missing? So we have created a setup code, but we haven't created a binding, which is what we need to do. So let's say bind here. Call itself. You can go there, go down, and you say func bind. And what are we going to bind? We are going to bind. So we need the name text field or text field, and now we have access to this text publisher. We created it. And this is the same type as our first name. We can assign it with this very swiftly syntax. You go with, you assign it to the first name, then on what you assign it on the view model. Cool. And we have to store this somewhere. So in order to get this working, you have to store it in the subscriptions. Command B, and it should compile. Really nice. So now our text field, everything we type in our text field will now be transmitted to our first name publisher. Okay. So now the next part is that we haven't actually started the validation because I created it as a function. And the reason I have it as a function is because in most cases, you don't just start a validation. You start a validation after you tap some button. So the user type in something, and let's say he types in his email, and if he wants to go to the next screen, he have to press the button next. And if it fails, then he will show the validation. So to have it as a function makes more sense. So let's call that function start validation, and you go with the view model and just dot. And again, since we want to observe the publisher, we can't just observe the normal property. We want to observe the most recent update from the publisher. We have to subscribe to it. So to get the publisher, we go to $sign and state, and we use this subscription. So now we attach a subscriber to it, called sync. And what value will we receive? We will, of course, receive the most recent state in our text field. Okay. Now we are going to create this method that doesn't exist yet. So we call it validation state changed, where we pass in the most recent state. And of course, since we are subscribing to the state, we have to store it somewhere. So store it in subscriptions. Cool. Now we're getting close. And since our text field doesn't have this method, let's implement it. Go back to custom text field. Go here where we have our methods. Go func. And what are we passing in? We are passing in a state of name view model name state. And what are we going to do when we receive the state? We should switch on the state. And when it's an idle case, we should just say break. And when it's an error case, we should, of course, handle the error. So we will create a label soon that's going to represent the error that we are getting from the state. So let's pretend that we have it now and just set the text here of the error label equal to the error state. Now this will make sense. Now we have the description I talked about, so we have a feedback. And since the error label should be hidden by default, let's go and set it to false. You just copy both of these, paste it here. And of course, when it's a success case, there shouldn't be anything here. And we should, of course, hide the error label. Nice. Now, since we don't have the error label, let's go and implement it. You go with a private lazy var error label of which type? It's a UI label. You set it to its closure that calls itself. You say let label is equal to UI label which frame of 0. You're using auto layout as usual. Put label here and let's think. Okay, the label should have a number of lines of 0. Why? If the error is long, it should be multi-line. So let's go to the next one. I think it's always should be aligned to the left. And since it's an error label, I think also that the color should be red. The label also, since it's an error label, it shouldn't be too big. So let's go with preferred font or text style of footnote. Okay, and like I said, it should be hidden by default because it shouldn't show up unless our state shows that it's an error. Okay. Now set this one so our code doesn't crash. And now we're getting very close. Okay. So so how do you actually show and hide views in UIKit? Because we need to show and hide the error label. And the best way is by using a UI stack view. Why? A stack view is much more flexible because it will offer you automatic constraints when you hide and show the views. This also applies if the process of hiding and showing views are done with an animation. So this makes a stack view perfect for the job. So let's create it. Private lazy var. Let's call it expanding the stack. And it's going to be of a UI stack view. We do the same dance that we have done here multiple times. Let's go with stack is equal to a UI stack view, and the frame should of course be 0 because we're going to use auto layout. Now, since it's a VStack, the axis should of course be vertical, and I want the error label to be 10 points from the text field background view. So add a spacing of equal to 10 and use auto layouts. That should be it. Cool. And now, since we have this expanding VStack, and since it should show the error label below our old UI, which is the text field background view, in my mind, the VStack should actually now be, you can say, the boss of our views. So it actually should be the parent of our old UI, which is the text field background view with the text field and the new UI error label. So to have both of them in the VStack, we have to reconfigure our setup. So let's set the expanding VStack as the boss here. So let's move, we shouldn't add the text field background view as the subview. Instead, we add the subview, it will be the expanding VStack. We can keep this one as it was. Let's just have it above. And now you go with expanding VStack, add ranged subview. And the first view that we are going to add to the VStack is the old UI. So text field background view. You can just go one below here and I go in the end here and we add the new UI, which is going to be the error label. Now, I don't like this left and right anchor, so let's remove those. and instead use the width anchor here. Constraint and equal to the width. And I think you actually don't need this one because the expanding VStack will take care of this constraint by itself. We already, this text field already has an intrinsic width, and our stack will actually fill out the rest of I think the width. I don't quite remember, but what I'm trying to say is that you actually don't need this one because, like I said, of text field and the stack view that we have, but you won't get any errors. So I just want to keep it. So you can just keep it. It's going to be fine. Now we want also the error label width to be constraint, not too constant, equal to the current width anchor of this view. Set that also to true. And now, since the expanding VStack contains all our subviews, when there's no error, it will be like this. But when the error label is added, the expanding VStack, of course, will grow in size. And that should be the height of this class. So instead of having a textful background view, now we should actually set the height equal to the expanding VStack's height anchor. Cool. Now we have a build succeed. And I think everything should work now. So let's try and test our implementation and see what we have. Let's see. Oh, yeah, you see it's working. Okay. We started the validation at once. A field can't be empty. Okay, cool. Let's try it. If I have one letter, the name is too short. And you see now, this is what I'm trying to say about the error hierarchy. The name is too short will come before. It has a higher precedence than numbers or special characters. So if I go with one number here, name is too short will come first. But if I go with another number, we have two characters. So now it will say name can't contain any numbers. Really nice. So now we have a nice description. And if I go with number here, can't contain numbers, go with special characters, can't contain special characters. Really cool. This is really, really cool. Okay. So as cool as this is, I actually don't like the solution. So I think this is actually a bad approach, not using combine, but using a view model, or not just a view model, but using a class for our validation behavior. And why is that? So the first problem I faced by using a view model as a class, I had to duplicate the validation process for each grid. Why? Let's say that after we finished here with the name validation, we go to an email screen to type in our email, then a password. So what happens then is that now you need an email view model, and now you need a password view model. And what are those going to contain? The exact same code that we have here with some small changes. And if you don't want that duplication, you need to create a base class and you need to subclass that class, and that you're going to get intrusive inheritance. You're going to struggle with shared state, and it's just going to be a mess. So the duplication was the first problem for me. And the second problem was that if you look at our view model, and this is actually a typical screen for, let's say, a validation, you don't do anything. You don't do a lot on a validation screen. So in my authentication process, I just validate a text field and then I move on. So I don't actually need a view model because it feels very forced. I just use the view model for a validation. The screens are fairly simple, so I don't need another reference type for the validation of the text input. So I thought, must be a better way, and there is. So whenever you're developing classes for behavioral purposes and you created some behavior that's hard to replicate, think protocols. So what do I mean by behavioral purposes? Think of what we're actually trying to achieve with our name view model class. We're not trying to create a layer between us and a specific service class where we can transform the models into actual data for view. No, we have just created a validation behavior. And the same goes for if we create a class for a drawing behavior. We will again restrict ourselves to the scope of our class and the limitation of classes. So in WWDC 2015, Apple introduced protocol-oriented programming with the purpose of tackling problems like this. So if you haven't seen that talk, I highly recommend that you do. I'll leave a link to the video. And I don't see this approach too often in application, but when it works, it's absolutely beautiful. So like Apple says, don't start with a class, start with a protocol. So let's go to our name view model and refactor all of these to something that we can use much more dynamically. So let's start with refactoring the first problem, which is going to be this function. And let's create a blueprint of what it does. So call a protocol called validatable, and the function is going to be validate, which is the same as we are doing down below. And of course, it needs a publisher. So it's going to be an any publisher and of course string, because we're doing validation. And it's going to return, like we do, instead of assigning a state, we're now returning a state. So any publisher, and we are going to create a new enum called validation state. And we will have the same of never. Okay. Let's implement our validation state. And we, of course, need the rest of the cases. And let's make a more sensible case for some of this. So go with case error, but here I want valid, makes more sense. We do the same thing here with a child enum called error state. So enum error state. But this time we are going to make these errors fit the rest of the text fields. So let's go with case empty. And now we have case invalid email, case too short password, case password needs numbers, and case password can't now password needs letters, of course. That makes sense. And case no, yeah, name same as we had. Name can't contain numbers. And you go with case name can't contain special chars, and the second last is too short name. And here you have a little bit cooler case. So if you don't want to type out everything here, you can go with this custom and string. So whenever you are like we are doing here, whenever we are passing in error, you can instead pass in a custom description for your error if you want to. So I have done it this way, but you can of course go with a custom string instead. So let's do the same thing like we did. Go with a description, of type string, and it's going to be a computer property where we are of course switching on the self. Command B, so you get that error and make our life simpler. Now we are going to make this one a little bit generic. So let's go with field is empty. Cool. Invalid email, return invalid email, and return here password is too short. Return password needs numbers. Return password letters, and return name can't contain any numbers. Yes, and let's go and this one, so it's a little bit simpler. Remove that in there and can't contain special characters. Yes, and return. Name is too short, and here it's just you get the current string that you have for the error and you just return that one. And I guess there's a simpler way of doing this, but this isn't the big purpose of what we are doing now. So just leave it like this and let's move on. So what is really cool about protocols is that whatever is going to implement this one is going to needs to validate. But like you saw earlier with our function here, this start validation gets help from all four of these. So what we can actually do is that we can actually extend the protocol. So extend validatable and create default implementation. So everyone that will implement this protocol will get all of these, but we have to just make some changes to them. So go here and instead of a computer property, go with a function. So let's see, func. What is going to be? Yeah, it's going to be is. I shouldn't have erased that. Is empty, and it should pass in a publisher of type any publisher and for string never. That should be it. Yeah, and then it should of course return instead of being a computer property. And you can remove the first name, and now we can have any publisher here that is of type string never. And now to make our life simpler, just go copy over here, copy over here, and this was is too short. But let's improve this one and also add a count instead of just having this hard-coded value of 2 or of 1, I mean. So let's go with instead, we had parentheses $0 dot count should be bigger than or equal to count instead. And of course we have to opposite. Now is empty is going to be has numbers. Instead, you go with here and has numbers. Cool. And the same goes here. You have has special characters or special chars. Make our life simpler. And you go back and has special characters. Okay. Now we are starting to get there. Okay. So if you think about it, what we really want are actually value types because not reference types, because we want to make plain copies of the validation behavior and then customize it. So let's do that. Let's, instead of having a class, a struct of name validation, and what should it inherit from? It should conform to this, not inherit, but it should conform to this protocol. And now this one will have access to all these functions, and you will see that this one will start to look really similar to the function that we have here. Okay, so go back to the name validation, and you can go with publishers, and you do the same thing, combine latest, all four of them. Let's go and actually just do it like this. So this will be a lot simpler. Yeah, and now you have is empty, but instead publisher, and we know that we are going to pass in into this function a publisher. So you can pass it in publisher and the count of 2. Same thing here, publisher. And you have publisher again, special chars, publisher, and publisher. Okay, so what I want to do now is let's take some control over this publisher too, because if we have all the same errors like we had earlier. So all the error cases are the same. We shouldn't be publishing the error again. So let's remove the duplicates. Then you get access to the previous case and the current case. And since we have a tuple, you have to do it really similar to the way we have down below. So preview.0, if it's equal to current.0, and we have to do it with all the cases to check whether the previous and the current, all of them are the same. I wonder if we actually can just do previous and cur. Can we do that? Let's see. Okay, let's just fix the rest of them and check if we can do that or if we have to do them individually. So empty. What we miss here is this name, too short name. Name can't contain numbers. Name can't contain special characters. Oh yeah, we can do it. Nice. We actually don't need to do them individually. Cool. Now we check either if the previous tuple is equal to the current tuple. And if they are, we remove the duplicate. So now we have some control over this flow here. Really cool. But as I promised, you're not just going to stop with a name validation. I promised that this approach was going to be much more flexible and better. So let's add another value, another validation with a struct and call it the email validation. It's going to be a lot simpler because it only needs 2 methods. And the second one is going to be is valid email. Email, of course. We're going to do the same thing again, pass in publisher, and now it's only going to be 2 of these, and we say if $0.1, then return error, and the error is I think it was invalid email. Let's hope so. This one doesn't exist. So let's create it. Go with another default implementation for all of the structs or all of the objects that implement this protocol and have string never like we did, and it should return any publisher of bool never. And you go here again, you say that publisher, and you map it. Now we don't have the same thing again. We don't have this this regular expression or this method to check whether is it an email. So go and call is valid email and go under again and erase to any publisher. So let's extend the functionality of our string and create this predicate. Or you can say create is conditional. So is valid email. It should check whether it's a boolean, and we're going to return and use our helper function. Now this one is pretty long, so I'm just going to copy this one. I'm not going to type it in. And I'm not going to explain it because it's pretty complicated, but at the same time, it's not. You can get a sense of it. Look at this now. What is an email? It's normally some email. So you see characters number. It can be characters number in first before the at, and then you will normally have an at, and then you will have Hotmail or whatever, and then you will normally have a dot, and you will have only characters because it will be like .com, .no, .co, and so on. Okay. Now we have a test for is it a valid email? I missed this one. Command B. That one should compile. We have a tuple argument. We have only 2 cases. Combine latest without a number is for 2 publishers. Cool. Now we have an email validation and a name validation. And now we only actually need a password validation. We have created a validation for all of our custom text field types. So let's go with password validation and go with validatable. Same thing again. It's going to have more cases. So let's copy the name validation. Makes more sense. And I think the password one is empty, is too short, but we want to do the opposite here. I'm going to show you. So the count should be at least 6. It should has numbers, and we need the last one. I want to check whether it has letters. And the check for whether it has letters can actually be done without a regular expression. So let's create this default implementation to string never and any publisher of type bool never and return with publisher map. This one is a little bit tricky, but let's make it work. Let's see. It's $0, so we check whether the string contains, and we can say where to this one, and you can say $0 is letter. Check for whether there is letters there, and you go with erase to any publisher. Nice. Now we can use this one with our password. We have everything here should be fine, but the error cases aren't right. So let's go back. The is empty should be right. We have now instead two short password, and the has number case now should be instead of has num. Yeah, it should be password needs numbers, and lastly password needs letters. But the has letters case should now actually be the opposite instead. The same will go with has numbers because we want it to has numbers. We want the password has letters. We don't want to check whether it doesn't have it, like in the name case. We want actually it to have both numbers and letters. We can pause all of these. It should be fine. So return valid, count 6. Yeah, all these should be fine now. And I think we actually can now test our implementation. So let's just try and check. We are going to improve this a lot, but still, let's check where we can do what I just told you. And let's see. Okay, now, how can we make use of all of our validations here? So to make use of our validation, let's create a protocol so that if a class conforms to the protocol, it now has the capability to use the methods of our custom validatable objects. Like if a class conforms to a UI text field delegate, it now has the capability to use the methods of the UI text field delegate. So let's go here to the validatable and create another protocol and call it validator. And the validator should have a function called validate text with small case e. And it's going to be, we are going to pass in the validation type, which is going to be enum, a new enum called validator type. And of course, we need the publisher. And the publisher is going to be any publisher of type string never. And of course, when this one is finished, it's going to return to us any publisher. And what do we want? We want the validation state that we created above. So the validation state and never. Let's just, if you do mark all this and you do a control and I, it will do this by itself. Now it will complain because we don't have this validator type. So let's implement it. Go with the enum and you call it validator type, of course. And we have the same cases as validations and the text field input type in our custom text field. So case email, case password, and case name. Now, how can we get all of those cases when we call this method? Because we have to have a way of switching between all of these types. So what you can do, and it's a nice approach in this typical situation, is that you create a factory. You can do this with a struct or an enum. It doesn't actually matter because it's a function that we want. So let's go with a validator factory. And what should it do? Let's create a static function called validate for type. You have it actually, I like to have it static here, and it actually seems a lot nicer when we implement it. So I'm going to show you, and it will make more sense in a bit. So we want to pass in the type and return a validation. So what is it we're going to return? We're going to return something that is the type of validatable, which is all our validations that we have created. So if we now switch on the type, you can see this will make a sense now, because we can return the email validation and return the password validation. Now we can return name validation. And now this will make a lot of sense, because now we don't need to do this switch statement inside the implementation of this protocol. We can just call the factory. So I also want that whoever is now a validator, whoever can now validate text, I don't want them to implement the same function each time. So let's create a default implementation so they can just call this function and get the validation. They don't need to do all this implementation, just call the function. So let's extend the validator. And if this is starting to get confusing, just wait a bit and it'll make a lot of sense. So extend it and take this function. Here we're going to create a default implementation. Now the factory will make a lot more sense. And the same with having it static, because now we can say actually validator factory dot validate for type, and which type? It's actually the validation type that we type in. So now we have the validation, and we can just return validator. Look how nice this syntax is. Return the validator, which is the object that we have, and validate for what? Validate for the publisher that we pass in. And it should compile. Really cool. Okay. Amazing. Now we actually have a class. Now we can actually make our class conform to this protocol, and we can do it with any class of our choice. So let's try it. Let's remove and clean up this view controller. Let's remove this function. We don't need this one. And remove all this binding that we have here. Yeah, I think we don't even need the binding function now at all. Let's make our name view controller conform to the validator. So let's say mark validator, and let's see if we get the same approach as we had. So you say validate, it should come here. It's, oh no, we are going to create, of course, my mistake. We need to create a function to start a validation. So let's go start validation. And inside here, we can now use the function. Now this will make sense. So you go validate text. There you have it. Awesome. Let's go and make this smaller for you. It looks a little bit better. Go like this. And what you want to validate for? We want to validate for a name. Like, let's see how this is super convenient. We can go with what publisher. We know that our name text field dot text field has the text publisher that we need. Now we can sync on it. We can actually subscribe to this state now. We have a weak self. And we can do the same thing again. We can go name text field, got the validation state changed, and we of course have to pass in that state. Now the state is going to yell at us because the state now is different, but it should be fine. So let's go back to the custom text field. And you go to validation state changed. And instead of this nonsense here, let's go with validation state, Command B. And now everything should work. And instead of bind, we can start it with start validation. And it has no member success. No, it's going to have valid case instead. And let's see. Okay. We may have to manually trigger this to make this empty work, but let's just try it first and see. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, that is true. So the notification center won't get triggered because it's just empty. The text hasn't changed. So to actually manually trigger the notification center, you can post notification, and you can just say name UI text field dot text change notification. That was the one we used. Yeah, let's keep it like this. And object is this object here. Now you see we get this empty. Oh, really nice. Look now. It works the same way. Look, custom placeholder, name is too short. We have my name with a number, can't contain any numbers. And if we want to change it, let's go with just password here. Let's see what's happened now. Password is too short. Let's see, we get password needs numbers. And now we have a valid password. How cool is that? Okay. But I'm still not satisfied at all because we can improve this a lot. So what I saw in production code was that usually the validation wasn't in the UI view controller. I usually found it in the implementation of a custom text field class. So why is that? Because now whenever we want to validate a text field, we now have to implement this method every time in a view controller. So if you take this one and just move it to the custom text field instead, we don't have to implement it each time. So let's go with here and go with custom text field instead. You of course have to go back here to start validation. So we can just remove that one. And let's make our changes here because now we don't need to call the class itself. We also don't have any subscriptions. So let's remove that name text field. There we go. And we need, of course, to import the combine library here because we don't have it. So we can access the subscriptions. Properties, yeah, they make sense to have it here. Private var subscriptions equal to a set of any cancelable. Do it like this, Command B. Now we have to hit store there, and of course it's not a name text field. We can just call the function itself, validation state changed. And we of course have to trigger this method. So the text field or the UI view class itself has a method that's really similar to view will appear. And that one is actually called did move to window. It's not that reliable, but it works in our case. So just call start validation here. Go back here and it should work now. I think you see all of them now as well. We started validation. Okay, awesome. Now, I'm still not happy. So let's make two changes that can make our code look beautiful. Two amazing things. Let me show you. So the first one is going to be we can actually take advantage of the raw value of our enum types. And what do I mean by that? Like I said, the validation type has the same cases as this custom text field class. So what do I mean by that? We go to the view model and you see the text field type, name, email, password. It's the same as these cases here. So how can I translate one case into another? And you can say, yeah, why don't you just have one enum instead? But if we had one enum, I think we would sacrifice the naming convention, because we will now have custom text field validation type, and that doesn't make sense. So instead, let's combine these two, not combine, but translate one into another. And like I said, we can take advantage of the raw value, because if the raw value matches, you will get the same case from the other. So let me show you what I mean. Declare this one as string in the validator type. And if you go back to where we were, we have already, this one is already also a raw value type. So let's go here. And instead of doing this, we just, you see here that we are actually hard coding in a password. Let me show you the magic of what I am talking about. So instead of doing that, what we can do now is we can say guard let validation type and set that equal to the validation type. And the raw value, what is the raw value? It's going to be the view model dot type dot raw value. Cool. So we initialize the case that we have now, and since it can use a raw value, we pass in the raw value of this enum, and then we will get the same case back. Else, return. Now, instead of having a hardcode password here, you can go with validation type, Command B, and of course you have to do that. But now check out, if you go back to name your controller, you can see that we have now 3 different validation. Look here. Now, let's see if I haven't missed anything. Yeah, password is too short. This is the email validation, and this is the this is the name validation. So how cool is that? I have made an error in the email validation, so we should go back and actually check out what I did wrong. And yeah, I know what I did wrong. You have to, of course, do this one backwards instead, because we check whether it's a valid email. That shouldn't be an error. So do the opposite to get invalid email. Go back, Command Option P. Now, let's see. Yes, invalid email. Let's do some email at hotmail.co or .com. Awesome. Nice. Now this looks a lot better. Okay. Now our text field chooses all the validation dynamically without we having to lift the finger. But before we jump to the final magic, the last one, we need to make some changes, because we don't tell our name view controller, we don't have a way of telling our name view controller that a validation now. So if we want to go to the next screen, we want to get some feedback from our custom text field that now validation is valid, you can go on. So let's do that. So let's do some refactoring and add some new properties. We actually, since we have combine here, let's also add this property here. So go with the at published called validation state. Validation state. And it should be of type validation state, of course. Set it to idle. And now we can do this one, because we have not error here, but we should check whether is it idle. I think that should be. So we can do that in the guard here. So go with validation state. If it's equal to idle, it should go on, because you won't start a validation state again after it's already started. That doesn't make sense. Now it will complain for the same error that we had earlier. So let's move back to the name view model. Let's go to the validation state, and it does know how to compare. So let's go with equatable, Command B. That will compile and go back to the custom text field. And now we want to have this state that we have here, and now we want to do the same thing. We want to assign the state to that property there. Okay. In the start validation. So in the validate text, instead of this here now, let's assign it to the publisher of the validation state. It should compile there. That should work. Let's go back to that one soon. The validation state. And now we need to listen so we can make the change here too. So let's call another method called .listen. Cool. And let's go here to our methods. We can have this private, of course, func listen. And what are we going to listen to? We are going to listen to the validation state. And we want to, we can do this receive on dispatch queue.main. So whenever we change our error label, so when we hide and show it, I actually want to do that on the main thread, since we're dealing with UI now. That will make sense. Go back here, sync, receive value. Same thing again, no retain cycle, get the state, move back here, self.validation state changed, pass in the state, and of course, store this one in subscriptions. Now, this one was complaining, but it shouldn't. Or does not conform to validatable. It may be because of this one. I know how to handle this one really cleverly, but maybe just skip it because we don't need it. Maybe we can pass in equatable here. Let's see. Yeah. All right. We don't need to do that hack I was talking about. Okay, nice. It works. Really cool. But now, as you see, this is starting to look better. We have a way of telling our view controller or parent class what is happening in our custom text field class. But let's say I also wanted to have more control over our text publisher, because whenever we're typing in our text field, text publisher itself isn't waiting or removing the duplicates, because if we're writing the same text that we had, so if you write, let's say, my name, and you just remove the last character really fast and move back to my name without or validation noticing if you're really fast, you want to remove the duplicates then. So we don't do that here. We don't remove duplicates when the text is the same. So what I want is a way of controlling our publisher a lot better. What you can do then is creating a computed property. So let's go with custom text publisher, and you set it as any publisher and set string, never. And you can get, because we have this text publisher, now you can remove the duplicates. And now, since this is a simple case, you don't need that previous and current. And what I also want to do is that I don't want to fire the validation like at once. I just want to wait when the user stops typing. So we can do this debounce for 0.2. So you wait 0.2 seconds, and you have to run this on the run loop.main. I think you can do dispatch queue.main too, but just keep it at run loop.main, and of course erase from the publisher so we don't get this horrible type. And instead of passing in this one, you can pass in the custom text publisher instead. Now, this sort of work, but I look at it, I'm like, I don't want this one. If you see really cleverly, you can see another solution that will make this code look like that. That will make this code look like magic. So let's do that. And this one is, I love this one. So go here. Now, if you think about it, what a validation should be is actually a combined operator. Because we have a text publisher, so why not perform the validation on the text publisher with a validation operator? Like that, in my mind, just make a lot more sense. So let's see how we can do this. It's not that hard to. So what you have to do now is extend the publisher, and you have to say where stealth with a big S. So it is the publisher that we have here now. And if you think about it, it makes sense because we need to do validation on something that is a publisher with a string type. So think about any publisher. What is the output? It's going to be equal to a string. And what was the failure output we had? So you said failure, and what was it? It was a never. Same as we had here. String, never. Okay. So if we have now a text publisher or something that publishes string, we can now actually perform the same method we have here on the publisher instead with an operator. And let's see. Now you can do this, but since we are on that publisher, we don't need this one. So you can remove this one, and instead of publisher, you can of course do a self.erase the new publisher, command B, and this one should compile. And look now, this is going to be so cool. Go to custom text field, remove this nonsense here, go down below, and instead of this code, which is okay, but we can like improve it so much more. So go here, and you say text field dot text publisher. Now we can directly control it here. Instead, go with remove duplicates. You want to debound, so we wait for 0.2 seconds on run loop.main. Now, look now what we can do. We can go with this method here, or this operator with a valid text, and we can pick the validation type, which we have done dynamically. Go with validation type there, and now we can assign it like we did to the state, validation state, command B, and look at the beauty of this code now. Look how simple and good this is. And now if you go to your name view controller, you do here, you run it, and you get the same thing. Look, here is the name text field. Let's write my name. Name is too short. We can do JO number, non-containing numbers. Let's move to the email, invalid. Let's go with some. And let's say at Hotmail. Shouldn't work. Should work there. Com is nicer. And let's move to this one. Let's say pass 1, 2, 3, 4. And now it works. Look at that. Look how cool this is. And we have done it. There's no running validation here. We can also go, let's say you had a button you wanted to check whether the validation is valid. You can just go func and move to next screen. Let's call it that. And you will call this when the validation or the user has tapped a button. I want to go to the next screen. So then you can go to, let's say, the name text field, and you can pick up the validation state, and you can check, is it valid? If it's valid, move to the next screen. How cool is that? And this is, oh, I love this one. So if you enjoyed this video and enjoyed this tutorial, I'm of course going to refactor all of these and move them into separate file in the repository that's going to be in the description down below. Otherwise, if you like this one and enjoyed it as much as me, leave a like or a comment, and I see you next time.